The Avalon spacecraft is flying towards the colony world called Homestead 2, while the Earth's population faces a mass migration. It is carrying 5,000 passengers in hibernation for a journey spanning 120 years. During the course, the spacecraft encounters a meteor storm, and the energy is diverted to its frontal shields. It collides with several meteors, including a large one that causes fluctuations in the system and disrupts operations. The control area receives red alerts on the screen before everything returns to normal. A mechanical engineer, Jim Preston, wakes up in his pod confused about where he is. Then a screen appears in front of him to assure Jim that everything is okay, and the confusion is part of post-hibernation. The voice informs him that he was in a hibernation state for 120 years. Jim recalls the circumstances of the journey and feels pleased to realize that the approach to Homestead 2 is imminent. Soon after he arrives at his private room to settle in and organize for the upcoming days, he prepares for a presentation but notices the absence of other people around him. Despite the 5,000 passengers on board and the 258 crew members, no one seems to be present. In search of answers, Jim hurries to the main area of the ship but finds no signs of other crew members and decides to explore other areas. He heads to the observatory where a voice reveals the distance to Homestead 2. Surprisingly, the voice informs him that only 30 years have passed in the journey, and Jim has awakened 90 years earlier than planned. Jim finds an office to send a message to the company responsible for the trip explaining that he is the only one awake. However, he understands that the message will only reach Earth after 19 years, and the fastest response could take 55 years. At that moment, Jim feels discouraged as he has no idea how to move forward with his life from there. Upon leaving the office, Jim spots someone at the bar and approaches Arthur, who is the bartender. Arthur offers him whiskey. While they are conversing, Jim notices a peculiar behavior in Arthur and realizes that he is actually a robot. Upon realizing he is alone, Jim finds manuals for the spacecraft that can assist him in navigation during his stay. He attempts to return to a state of hibernation but fails. Furthermore, his wrist device restricts his access throughout the ship, leading him to try and force entry into the crew capsules for assistance. Arthur is Jim's only company. All responses are controlled by artificial intelligence. While conversing with Arthur about his concerns, the robot emphasizes that worrying will not have a significant impact. Instead, Jim should enjoy life a bit. A glimmer of hope arises for Jim, prompting him to trespass into the exclusive area of the spaceship and indulge in luxurious facilities. Jim spends the next few months in a stunning suite with access to food and entertainment. After a year, Jim still finds himself lonely. Consequently, he enters a room where passengers have the option to don spacesuits and can remain connected to the ship via a tether, gazing at space with admiration. Yet, simultaneously haunted by sad memories, he contemplates the possibility of giving up by opening the ship without the spacesuit. But he changes his mind at the last moment, so he rushes back to the hibernation room and slips on a bottle. When he gets up, he sees a pod with a beautiful woman named Aurora, and her beauty impresses him, prompting him to examine the passenger profile and discover that she is a journalist on her way to Homestead 2. He sits beside her pod to learn more about her, contemplating whether or not he should wake her up, aware that doing so would condemn him. However, Jim can no longer bear the isolation after a year alone, so he makes the decision to wake her up. Aurora's pod is activated, bringing her to consciousness within minutes. Jim goes to his room, unable to believe what he has done. After some time, Jim meets Aurora. Acting as if he doesn't know her, he explains that they both woke up much earlier than the others. He guides her through the entire ship, and Aurora panics. She returns to the hibernation room in an attempt to get back into her pod, but Jim explains that it's futile. Later, Jim asks Arthur to keep it a secret that he was the one who woke up. The next day, Aurora and Jim discuss possible solutions to the problem, but repairing the hibernation pod is impossible due to limited resources. Aurora begins documenting her experience adapting to life within the ship. Her daily routine includes activities like running, swimming, and riding. Jim introduces Aurora to the ship's entertainment options, and they enjoy their time together. Jim also introduces Aurora to Arthur. As the days pass, Jim's attraction to Aurora grows and they become closer. So Jim invites Aurora to a dinner. Jim takes Aurora to the spacesuit room to get ready and explore outer space. They hold hands while flying through space, and Aurora expresses gratitude to Jim for the night. Shortly after they go to Jim's room and share a more intimate moment in the following days, they spend all their time together with joy, and Aurora feels they are meant for each other. They engage in various activities together, from exercising to using the entertainment area and contemplating the stars. When Aurora's birthday arrives, the ship passes by a large star, and Jim and Aurora watch as Jim prepares a meal for her and goes to the bar to fetch some drinks. After Jim serves special cocktails while he's in the bathroom preparing a gift for Aurora, Arthur comments that it was a good choice for Jim to wake her up. However, things start to unravel when Aurora realizes that her awakening wasn't by chance and she becomes furious, refusing to talk to Jim. She throws and breaks objects in a separate space to vent her anger. In the following days, Jim becomes isolated and Aurora isolates herself even more. She avoids Jim no matter how much he tries to rekindle the connection between them. One night, Aurora enters Jim's room and hits him while he sleeps. Driven by anger, she attempts to attack Jim with a crowbar but decides not to proceed. On a particular day, Jim uses the ship's intercom system to apologize, but Aurora screams. She copes with stress by watching videos of her friends in the passenger log. Meanwhile, the control room is receiving more system failure alerts. Jim and Aurora notice issues with cleaning robots and food machines which are experiencing malfunctions in their systems. One day, a crew member named Gus Mancuso uses the intercom system and arrives in the main area of the ship. Similar to Jim and Aurora, Gus also woke up early due to issues with the hibernation pods. According to him, the pods were supposed to be fail-safe, so something must be defective. His wrist device provides access to the command center, where they discover that the ship's automated diagnostics have failed, requiring physical inspections on each deck. Gus examines Jim's hibernation pod and identifies the issue as a defect in the clock chip. In Gus's case, multiple system failures occurred simultaneously, further complicating the situation. He also checks Aurora's pod and realizes what Jim did. The entire ship is on the verge of collapsing in space, jeopardizing the entire crew and passengers. The main engine section was the first to be affected, but a physical inspection will be necessary to determine exactly where. Gus withdraws after experiencing a kind of hibernation hangover and cooking up blues. That night, Aurora struggles to sleep and decides to swim to clear her mind. However, the ship experiences a loss of gravity, causing the water to float in the air, and Aurora becomes temporarily trapped underwater. Gravity returns, leaving her safe. Meanwhile, Jim also wakes up after the sudden jolt and checks on everyone's condition. The three gather in the control room and realize they are experiencing an increase in malfunctions. Gus identifies cascading issues and the computer generates a timeline, revealing the initial failure that occurred 2 years ago. This leads him to conclude that the initial failures resulted in energy deviations in an attempt to rebalance the load, but it became too burdensome, leading to subsequent malfunctions. While searching for a solution, Gus faints, and Jim and Aurora take him to the infirmary. They place him in a self-diagnostic scanner to monitor vital signs, but due to the hibernation pod failure, Gus shows multiple areas of necrosis on his body. The machine offers Gus the option to end his suffering by providing 2 lethal pills. Gus spends some time alone reflecting on life while shedding tears. Then he puts on his crew uniform and prepares to say goodbye, handing the wrist device to Jim and Aurora. With it, they can access the ship areas where repairs are needed. Gus reminds them of the importance of taking care of each other. At the moment of his farewell, another system failure occurs and the ship goes into red alert. Aurora and Jim need to go to the ship's engineering department to handle the problem. On the way, gravity is deactivated, causing them to float and fall at a certain point. In the bar, they find Arthur malfunctioning, so Jim deactivates him to prevent damage to his components. In the engineering room, Aurora and Jim identify a hole caused by a meteorite that penetrates areas of the ship. When they open one of the doors due to the breach in the hull, Aurora is almost sucked into space. Jim uses a substance to seal the hole further after she blocks it with a provided pill. As oxygen levels return to normal, they discover more openings in the ship. Upon entering another room, they realize that the reactor control computer caused failures and random issues in the ship's system. Jim replaces the damaged module, but it is necessary to release the fusion exhaust thruster to prevent further damage. Jim has to go out to make the repair and hands Aurora Gus's wrist device. Before leaving, Aurora tells Jim that he needs to come back because she can't imagine living on the ship without him. While Jim is in the exhaust room, Aurora sustains injuries from flying debris as the temperature rises. On the other hand, Jim enters the exhaust corridor, but the opening won't remain open if he doesn't hold it. Jim needs to stay in place to manually operate the ventilation system, which involves risks for him. Aurora argues with Jim over the radio, desperate not to lose him, but he instructs her to activate the lever. For the sake of the other passengers, the pressure pushes Jim out of the exhaust corridor and his tether breaks, leaving him floating freely in space. Shortly after, he notices a hole in his spacesuit, putting the oxygen level in a critical state. Aurora is relieved to know he is alive, but they soon face another problem. Jim says goodbye to Aurora and apologizes for what he has done. However, she refuses to leave him, so Aurora rushes to the spacesuit room and searches for Jim in space. She manages to rescue him, but Jim is unconscious due to lack of oxygen. Nevertheless, she pulls him inside and takes him to the infirmary in an attempt to save him. Unfortunately, the software declares that Jim has passed away and Aurora refuses to accept it. Using Gus's wrist device and the override code, Aurora performs various procedures to revive Jim. However, he remains unresponsive. After some time, Jim comes back to life and the procedure is successful. Aurora kisses Jim and they embrace. Days pass, and the ship returns to normalcy. Aurora fixes Arthur and adjusts his components while Jim studies the software. He explains to Aurora that the device could be used to put her back into hibernation in the infirmary, but she declines. Since there's only one autodock, she doesn't want Jim to be alone again. Consequently, she chooses to stay awake and spend the rest of her life with him on the ship, even if they never reach Homestead 2. Jim gifts Aurora with the ring he had planned to give her earlier. 88 years later, the ship arrives at Homestead 2, and the other crew members wake up from hibernation. To their surprise, the ship is filled with trees, vines, vegetation, and birds. Aurora's voice narrates the story of how she met Jim, describing their happy time on the ship. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to receive more videos like this. Thank you for watching.